Hi everyone, I'm Chris and this is the POCO M3. So you've probably already seen a few videos on this one already, and this is just my take on this value budget offering here from POCO. By the way, full disclosure, this was sent out to me. This is a free unit that I do get to keep. So we've got a 6,000 milliamp hour battery in this. We have the Snapdragon 662. It's 4G dual SIM, micro SD card support, 3.5mm headphone jack, IR transmitter, dual loudspeakers, and a full HD screen, all for a starting price of currently $129 US, which is an absolute steal, or 129 euros. Later on, it's going to be about, I think it's 150 US. Now, this model that I got sent is the maximum spec model that has the UFS 2.2 storage, 128 gigabytes worth of it, and it does retail, I think, for about 150. Later it's going to be 169 US. So is it actually a good phone for that price? That's what I want to find out. Or should you save your money, wait and just get something like the POCO X3 NFC instead of this one? Let's find out. So it may be a cheap phone, but they didn't cheap out on what we get included, as you shall see. So there is our SIM tray tool. We've got an included TPU case. Now this one is clear. It does actually have a little cover for the Type-C port. We get a warranty card, and this is a Xiaomi warranty card, but that is soon going to disappear because POCO's become now completely independent, standalone now brand. And here we have our user guide. And right under here, you'll find some accessories I've included. So it's a little bracelet thing if you're into that with the POCO branding. And we do have our standard Type-C to USB cable and our charger. So this charger is rated to 22.5 watts, but the phone actually charges at a maximum of 18 watts. Now it will take 2 hours and 53 minutes to charge that big 6,000 milliamp hour battery. So let's have a look at our build quality now of this phone. So it's not actually bad at all considering the price tag. You may hear me say that a few times. Gorilla Glass 3 on a full HD display. So this one, Full HD Plus, is 1080 by 2400. Teardrop notch houses an 8 megapixel f1, 2.1 camera there. And the bezels and the chin down the bottom aren't actually particularly bad considering, again, the price of the phone. Now we've got a side fingerprint reader. This one here does have a always on capacitive to it. So it's what we're seeing on some of the even more potent and expensive phones, like say the Mi 10T and the 10T Pro, for example. But what happens if I touch it now, you'll see it's relatively slow here. So when I touch it, 1, 2, and it didn't read then, I'm finding it a little bit inaccurate. So let's do that one more time. 2 seconds or so, just under 2 seconds to unlock, so a little on the slow side there. Now, if I give it a bit of a flex, this phone weighs 200 grams. It's about 10.8 millimeters, the thickness, if you include the camera, which sticks out a little tiny bit. It's not actually bad. There's no creaking noises. It doesn't feel cheap. So on the left top hand corner here, we do have our SIM tray. Now, this SIM tray takes 2 nano SIMs and a micro SD card. The good thing about it is you can run the 2 SIMs and the micro SD card, so all 3 at once with this phone, which is great. Down the bottom, you'll find that Type-C port, and we do have a microphone there and a loudspeaker, 1 of 2. So the earpiece and then the port for the loudspeaker is just here at the top. We have a 3.5mm headphone jack, with not too bad quality output from this one. This is our secondary mic, so at least it does have it. Some other cheaper phones might actually exclude this, and even an IR transmitter here. This phone also does, the M3, have FM hardware radio built into it. So there is a tuner, but you need to plug in a headset, of course. The backing on it here, as you can see, all plastic again. Now this has a texture to it, but the good thing about the texture, it's not that rubberized paint job. That rubber paint job wears out, shows smudges, so I'm glad they did not go with that at least. Now the POCO here, this is made out of a glossy plastic. Not particularly fond of this. Why do they have to put it on there so big, the branding? And if you look in the light here, you can probably pick up, I've already got a couple of fine scratches on this, so that material is not going to age too well. We do at least have glass here on the back with our cameras. So the main camera, this one is 48 megapixels f1.8. Then we have 2 megapixel cameras, one for portrait, one for depth. And honestly, we did not need these. I would have rather POCO put the money on those 2 sensors into a average quality, but maybe more useful ultra-wide 8 megapixel camera. I think most people would agree with me on this one. It's just much more practical. And I hope this trend of using the sticker cameras, as others call them, stops and they continue just to give us an ultra-wide and a main camera on the lower end phones. I don't think it's going to be too much of a problem. So we got a Gorilla Glass 3 covered screen. I've got no screen protector on it, and it's a full HD plus resolution at this price point is great. That is definitely a selling point. Now this particular screen, it does have quite a weak maximum brightness. Now my unit here, it could vary from unit to unit. I'm measuring a maximum brightness of only 346 nits. Now in direct sunlight, this means I do actually struggle to make it out. So if you plan to use your phone outside, you may struggle quite a bit. Another thing I have noticed with this screen, that at certain angles, definitely straight away when you don't look at it straight on, that it does shift out to a bluish tint, and you'll notice that straight away that it dims down at certain angles. So for an IPS, the viewing angles aren't actually the best I have seen. So don't get me wrong, when you're using it indoors and when you're looking at it straight on at least, it's not a bad panel. And the touch response seems to be okay. Sometimes it can be a little bit laggy, but I think that's just a case of that Snapdragon. And you'll see what I mean here. When you start to use the phone, it's evident, and there were a couple of firmware updates that already come out, that it's not particularly quick, that it does really feel quite choppy and laggy. It's like, to me, the best way to describe this is this UI is running at somewhere between like 40 and even down to 20 frames per second, some of the animations. Now, I have noticed that when you go to recent apps, did you see all that lag right then? Now, I've got a couple of things open, yes, quite a few things open in the background, but nothing is really heavy, no demanding game. So if you multitask, even though I've got the best spec version with the UFS 2.2 storage, 128 gigabytes, and 4 gigabytes of RAM, it really is struggling with that, I have noticed. So maybe I've got too much open. You do need to close things down, but even doing so, okay, I've cleared the memory. You just notice that it just doesn't quite feel as good as it should here. So POCO launcher, that's our UI here, and it is running Android 10. Now, if I go into the camera, this is another area that is quite slow and laggy. I do believe the ISP, which is the image signal processing unit, part of this particular system on a chip, struggling a little bit with the 48 megapixels. And even when I minimize and get out of it, you can sometimes see that it really lags away there. So going into gallery 2 can be a little bit slow to load in everything, different albums. And I honestly don't have a lot of photos and things in there. So performance-wise, it feels like quite a slouch when you're in Chrome, when you're in scrolling and anything. It's not particularly brilliant, but let's go over a couple of the benchmarks and things that I always cover in my reviews. So I'll start out with the battery life. Before I do, there is a bit of bloatware you get with this. So it's not actually as bad as the Mi 10 Lite, for example, that I recently reviewed in the channel. That had 28 bloatware applications that are on there that I uninstalled, 2.2 gigabytes worth. Luckily here, we've only got 10, and you can just go into the system, you find apps, uninstall that rubbish that you don't want, and it's not too hard to do. But I'm reviewing out of the box here, and there we go, battery life. We've got a massive battery on here, and honestly, I think for the 6,000 milliamp hour battery, I expected a little bit more. I've seen battery capacities of 4,000 milliamp hours with, well, probably more efficient chipsets getting similar results or over. So not quite as good as I was expecting, but it's a 2-day phone for most people. It is good on battery life, don't get me wrong there. Now here we have, okay, Antutu, yeah, not great. The GPU is the definite weakness of this chipset, and that's why I say it's struggling, this GPU, with the 1080p resolution. And you do notice it. Even just scrolling in this, I'm seeing it kind of chugging away there. So the internal storage UFS 2.2 is good, and we are getting some very decent random reads and writes. So this is not a bottleneck. The storage is not slowing it down. It is definitely the Snapdragon 662. For me, that is really the weakness. So what are we looking at here? Now, if you happen to get this phone, of course, and out of the box, you're going to find advertising in some of the system apps, like the installer. Now, there is a setting right here to go and actually disable that, okay? Receive recommendations. So that's their app recommendations, aka advertising. It shouldn't be there in the first place, but I did notice that when I disabled it, it actually came back. So I had it disabled first, it popped up again, the advertising, which is not great. Why was it re-enabled? Well, I think what happened is the firmware update enabled it again. So people who are not great with their phones that don't even know to check for this probably wouldn't even disable it. And us techies, of course, we go and we disable it and do all those sort of things. But as mentioned, I review out of the box. So we do have at least Widevine level 1 cert, so that's great. You can watch, say, Amazon Prime or Netflix is going to be in full HD, which is good, but it may be a little bit choppy. Camera 2 API, so we've got level 3 here as well. If you want a Gcam port, we may be able to squeeze a bit more out of that 48 megapixel sensor, because as you'll see later on from camera samples, it's not wonderful, but again, for the price, yeah, I guess it fits. Which is also fitting here for the wireless performance. Up close to my router, I can get almost 200 megabits per second. Good, that's fine, considering again the price. Away from my router, 72. Yeah, it's okay. I mean, it's not amazing, but I can still download things. GPS is also working just fine. So in those aspects with the performance, I think for the category being a value, budget, phone, and the price, if you get it for that amazing price, yeah, it's not too bad, but it's just certainly that system UI lag. I hope that Xiaomi can speed this up a little bit. POCO, should I say now. But POCO, I think they're already pushing probably that chipset to its maximum. Hey, so it's not all bad news because we do have loudspeakers on this particular phone that are better than a lot of mid-range phones that I review in the channel. So downwards firing here and an output that comes from the earpiece and here. And actually, it's got a little bit of bass and it's reasonably rich and good loudness as well. Now the 3.5mm output, if you love to have still this now dated tech that everyone's phasing out, sounds good. It sounds pretty good. It's not the best I've heard, but it's definitely for the pricing category of this phone, punching above its class here and going more towards a mid-range in terms of audio. But here's a sample of this loudspeaker at 100% volume. And another reason why you should ignore those synthetic benchmark numbers, because according to the synthetic benchmarks, this GPU is super weak, but it actually games all right. This was a surprise. I found the gaming performance to be reasonable. Just make sure you go with lower settings. So this game I'm playing is Shadowgun Legends, and yeah, you will see the occasional frame dip, but overall the performance was great. And then gaming for 30 minutes, it didn't really get that warm, not even warm enough for me to break out my thermal imaging camera. So I think for the price, I know I've said it like 28 times now, it does actually perform well for gaming performance at this price point. Moving over to our cameras now. So we have an 8 megapixel camera here on the front. It has an f2.1 lens and no electronic image stabilization. The audio quality is 96 kilobits per second. It's not particularly good. And this footage I would definitely rate as being average and to poor quality almost. Let's take a look now at the rear camera. So with the rear camera, 48 megapixels with its f1.8 aperture, we can only shoot 1080p 30 frames per second maximum, and it is of average quality leading towards poor. We don't even have electronic image stabilization. So if you were buying this particular phone for its video performance or even the cameras, I would seriously think again and look at the POCO X3 or the Mi 10T Lite. I think is a good alternative.
Okay, so a lot of people are probably going to think that, hey, this guy's being far too harsh. The phone just costs $129.
US dollars. But this version I have is going to be later on 169. So I'm factoring that in a little bit, but I'm also factoring years of experience of testing out budget phones. I've been reviewing Xiaomi phones ever since the Mi 2S. I'm talking about like 7 years. And all the other budget phones out there I've reviewed, a lot of them don't have some of the issues that I'm seeing with this particular one here. Now I'm talking about the UI lag I'm experiencing. POCO is definitely aware of this. We've already seen now, I think I'm on the 3rd patch that came through that does say system optimization. They're addressing performance issues. They're trying to improve it. So clearly they know that it's not really, well, I don't think it's acceptable, even for that price tag. I'm not being too harsh here, please. Do just bear with me on this. I know a lot of owners are probably going to join in and see this review and just comment that, hey, I'm being too harsh. What are you talking about? And that always happens. The buyers jump on and attack the reviewers. The cameras, okay, yeah, daytime stills are all right. Low light is not good at all. We have a dull display. Don't get me wrong, having full HD at this price tag and an IPS is great, but it should be a little bit brighter because I'm struggling to see it in daylight. And the plastic build, even though it is plastic, it is good. Okay, good build quality. Fingerprint read is a little bit slow. Face unlocking as well is a little faster actually, the face unlocking, but still a little slow with the animations. Now, one thing to point out with the cameras that I have in various other videos that I review is still this trend of using two basically useless cameras, 2 megapixel macro, 2 megapixel depth. And why do we have this? I'd rather have an 8 megapixel ultra wide, or better yet, why not just a single camera on the rear that's more high quality? I think they can do it. Maybe even though one of those high quality Samsung 12 megapixel ones. We don't need to be part of the megapixel race, but hey, the general average consumer thinks more megapixels is better, more cameras are better, but of course they're not. So huge battery in this, 6,000 milliamp hours. It takes almost 3 hours to charge, which is okay for the price tag, surely. The battery life, a little disappointing. I was actually expecting more. I've seen 4,000 milliamp hour batteries get very similar scores at 60 Hertz. And the UI is not clearly running at 60 Hertz either on this. So as a phone in total, as a package, even in factoring in that super good price, I can't recommend this. I just can't. I can't get behind it because I don't want to put my name behind a phone like this and say, yeah, go out and buy it. It's a value champ. It's a battery king. It's amazing. Wow. Clickbait thumbnail. No. I think the Mi 10T Lite is the better deal to go for, or the POCO X3. Okay, because if this later is going to be selling for about 169 US dollars, then it's not too far away. Save yourself an additional 30, 40, and maybe even, if it is, 50 more, okay? Get yourself the POCO X3 NFC or the Mi 10T Lite. The Mi 10T Lite, in fact, was selling for just recently for about 175 euros, whereas this model is about 150. It's clear to winner to me is to go for the Mi Lite. Okay, it's got a much better chipset. It's way faster. We're talking about a higher refresh rate screen, better cameras. The list goes on and on and on and on. So that is why I simply cannot, unfortunately, with my experience at least, recommend the POCO M3. So if you are an owner, I know there are a lot of owners that love to watch reviews and later disagree with the reviewers. Let me know in the comments why you disagree with me, why you think that I'm being too harsh or whatever. And let's hear those opinions. And I do hope to see you in the next up and coming review. Bye for now.